hear that. But anyway, let me get back to the start. It's just a pleasure for me to be able to share this morning with you, Calvary Kaleo, from Brașov, Romania, with love to you. Now, it's been a long time since I was actually in Brawley to share at the church, but thank God with the technology, I can share with you this way. Now, the question I want to start out with is, for you today, is what is the secret to happiness? Well, according to a study that was done at Harvard, where they followed over 700 people for 75 years, they discovered that the most important factor by far is the quality of our relationships. That's right. And they said this. They said that the biggest factor or predictor in happiness and fulfillment in life is love. And that makes sense in light of who God is and who we are. So I'm going to start with some scriptures, but I'm going to be using the CSB version, the Christian Standard Bible, just in case you're not familiar with it. So I just didn't want you to be surprised. Right? So we'll start in Genesis 1:26. And there it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." So from the beginning, we see that there was a relationship in the Trinity. He said, let us make in our image, in our likeness. So there was always this eternal relationship. And that makes sense. For love to exist, there has to be relationship. So for love to be eternal, it has to have been in the Trinitarian relationship. Now in Genesis 2:18, we see this. Then the God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper corresponding to him. So this we see that God has shown us that since we're made in his image, we're wired for relationship. And we need relationships with one another. And we understand that, like love, because we saw earlier, is at the core of who God is. John said this in 1 John 4:8. The one who does not love does not know God, because God is love. And so if we come to understand God and have that relationship, then love should be something that's a part of our lives. So it makes sense that happiness and satisfaction in life comes from love. And so it's our key if we want to be happy. But I have a question for you to think about. What happens to those who don't experience love? What about those who those who are neglected, abandoned, or abused? What happens to them? And is there anything that can be done for them? Well, today I want to try to answer some of those questions by first sharing with you. I'm going to spend some time sharing with you a few of my life experiences and what I learned from them. And then we'll look at what the Bible has to say. Now, when it comes to love, I'm no expert. I'm a work in progress. I struggle with love. Do you? Now, so this sermon is for me just as much as it's for you. Now, some of these things may be hard for you to listen to if you've been neglected, abandoned, or abused. And I understand that I'm sure some of you have been. But whatever your situation is, I encourage you to listen, not only with your ears, but also with your heart. So let's pray, and then we'll get into the sermon. Father, you are love, and love is the key to happiness. But Lord, what about those who do not get love? Help us to understand and to be able to feel for those who never experience love. And show us how we can bring your love to them so that in the end, you will be glorified and the people will be blessed. So what happens to the neglected, the abandoned, and abused. I want to start by sharing with you my experience of working in orphanages in Romania. I spent 5 years working in orphanages for babies and toddlers. And it was a powerful experience for me. And at first, it was not easy. When I saw how the babies were treated, how no one touched them, no one did anything for them, the only time they were touched is when they'd be thrown on the counter to have their diaper changed and then thrown back in the bed. There was no love involved in any of that. And so I had actually, at first, it was hard for me to see this and to see the impact on the kids. I would actually have to go into a back room so I could cry so no one would see me. It took me a while to get used to seeing this and then seeing that my part was to try to do something to help them. And so that's why I could stand to be there, is because I wanted to have an impact for the Lord there. Now, when babies are not touched very much, they stop crying. If no one responds to them, they just sit in their cribs and they never cry. They tend to just sit there and roll side to side like this. And occasionally they'll put their hand up in the air and just stare at it to get some stimulation, because there's nothing there for them. There's no one talking to them. There's nothing happening for them. And as they get a little older, when they're sitting up, they just tend to rock back and forth like this in their cribs. And some of them will just start banging their heads against the crib or the wall just to feel something. It's very hard to see this. Now, as they get a little older, they having nobody touch them, they have developed attachment disorder. And if you were to go up and try to hug them, they would just freak out, start crying, and push you away. They had no understanding of that. This part of their lives, they have never experienced anything like that. So they just freak out. And so you cannot touch them. And so this is what the experience of no love does for little ones. And it shows how critical love is for everyone. Now, later on in my life, when I was going to Bible school, I was helping do ministry with university students. And one of the guys in our group for the university students, he brought this friend from work one time to our Bible study. And his name was Jeff. And Jeff was a very different guy. You know, he had some kind of bone, I don't know what you call it, syndrome with his bones, because his fingers were really weird shaped and his face looked a little strange, just a little bit. And he was just very sarcastic and negative and looked at everything from like what's bad about everything. And he thought the worst of people. And he had no social skills whatsoever. In fact, when my friend from our Bible study met him, even though Jeff was working with him, he didn't get a full-time job. He had a hard time keeping a job. And so Jeff would go back and behind restaurants and dig food out of the garbage because he didn't have enough money to eat. So you could see that he had this really difficult time because of what went on in his life. And I will share that with you later. But first, one thing, we all gathered some money to give it to him so he could have some food. And you know what he did? He went to the store and bought himself a nice leather jacket. Then he came up to me and said that he liked this to be what he wanted. This is what he wanted, and he really wanted it really bad. And then he asked me for some money for food. And I said, Jeff, we gave you money for food. If you're hungry, eat your jacket. So I was trying to teach him there's consequences if you make certain choices. Now, for me, let me share my experiences from growing up. I grew up with a father who did not love me at all. All he did my entire life from the time I was a little boy was tell me how worthless and how incapable I was of doing anything. I honestly don't remember him ever saying that he loved me, or I don't remember saying anything positive to me, or congratulating me, encouraging me. I never experienced that in my life. In fact, when I was in high school, you know, when I was in 11th grade, it was my dream to make the high school basketball team, the varsity team. And finally I did, in 11th grade. And I was so excited, and I went home, and my family was around the dinner table eating, and I come in and go, I made the team. And my dad stopped eating. He looked at me and he said, the coach must have felt sorry for you. Imagine a whole life of that. It had its impact on me in the way it hurt me. Whenever, even from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, I can remember just hardening my heart to people, almost like from Star Trek when the enemy was coming, they'd say shields, and they'd put these shields up to protect the spacecraft. And I would put up shields to protect myself from people and the things they would do to hurt me, or at least I thought they would try to hurt me, like my dad. So I grew up angry. I had a hard heart. And I really, even from the time I was 5 years old, I got into stealing and vandalism and fighting because I hung around kids who were just like me, who had the same experiences. And so this continued until 8th grade, where I had a wake-up call. I was hanging out with a couple of my friends, Harvey and Kenny, and they lived outside town a couple miles. And one afternoon we were hanging out, and this airplane, this low, single engine, just coming over really low, this little plane. And they go in the house, and he gets out a .22 rifle, a very small caliber, and he comes out and starts shooting at the airplane. And this just freaked me out. And as soon as I could make an excuse, I said, I have to go home. I left, and I never had anything to do with them ever again. Well, eventually they dropped out of high school. And while I was going to university, when I come home the summers to work. And one day I open the newspaper and I see their picture in there. They had robbed the gas station, killed the attendant, and were now sentenced to life in prison. Man, that could have been me. These guys had a very hard life. All their parents were alcoholics and never, ever did anything but abuse them. So I was thankful that I didn't go that deep into my anger like they did. Now, after this, even when I was at high school, college, even when I was older, having a business, I still struggled with this idea of being open to people and connecting with them. I would freak out when people would try to hug me. I was just like those kids at the orphanage. I didn't like hugs. It just freaked me out. And imagine, I'm in my 20s, going into my 30s almost. And so we see the impact that the lack of love has on people. What does happen? First of all, there's pain in the lives of people who have never experienced love. That's a heart pain that goes deep into their souls. They turn inward, they're angry and bitter, and they distrust everyone. And that darkness, a lot of times, leads people into the pit of destruction. So this is what happens to those who are neglected, abandoned, and abused. Is there any hope for them? Yes, there is. So let me share with you, let's go back, and I'll share things that I experienced that showed that there's hope. Back at the orphanage, what I would do is I would go in and do physical therapy and massage with the babies and look at them and talk to them and tickle them and hold them. And over time, you would start seeing them to start changing. And then with the toddlers who had pretty severe attachment disorder, it would take a long time to bring healing. What I would do is I'd sit them on the couch next to me and put some toys there so that they could play. And gradually, I would move them closer and closer to me, or I would move closer and closer to them, to the point where they were actually sitting next to me, touching me, and that they just got comfortable with that situation. Then eventually, I'd put them on my knees, facing away from me, and bounce them up and down like they're on a horsey and tickle them a little bit. And I would do that till I felt like they really enjoyed it. Then I would turn them around and look at me and do the same thing. But over time, I would move them closer and closer and closer to the point where I could actually hold them. If they resisted, I just took my time. But eventually, most of the children would let me do that. Very few would not accept it. But sometimes it could take a few months to do this. So you could see that if you were persistent in your love and consistent and not pushing too hard, that they would open up over time. Now, Jeff, this young man who had the situation I told you about where he was sarcastic, dark, just didn't enjoy life too much. He had a good sense of humor, but that was kind of a cover for the pain that was inside him. So, be honest, he was coming to our Bible study, and I honestly didn't really like him too much. I just like, whoa, what's wrong with this guy? So I finally felt convicted about how I was being with him. So I asked him to go to lunch with me one day since he didn't have much for food. And when I took him to lunch, I started out by sharing my story about my dad. And oh my gosh, that just opened the floodgates. And he told me everything that happened in his life, about how weird his parents were and how all the neighbors made fun of him. And because his parents were weird and he looked a little strange because of the syndrome he had, all the kids made fun of him. You guys know at most schools, there's one kid especially that everybody picks on. Jeff was that kid. And so, no wonder he was so angry and hurt, because he never experienced anything but pain from people. Okay? But here's what happened that was interesting. What changed at that moment was not Jeff. What happened is it changed me. Knowing his story broke my heart. And then I was a lot more patient and caring and willing to just overlook all his weirdness and the things he was doing and just try to love him. So I think that's critical. We need to get to know people's story. Now, for me, growing up with a father who didn't love me, thankfully, I had a mother who loved me. But it wasn't so easy for her to express it because of all the pain in her life dealing with my father, because he was not very loving to her as well. And so even though I know my mom didn't express it very much, I knew she loved me. So that was my anchor. But I also had coaches in sports from 5th grade through high school. I had a few coaches here and there that, said encouraging words to me or commented about something that I did was good. And boy, when that would happen, I would just soak it in because I never heard that before. And so I was really motivated to be in sports because that was the only place I get any positive feedback or any affirmation. And so, what's interesting is that when I got done with high school, I wanted to become a coach because I saw the impact that they had on me, and I wanted to have that impact on other kids. And so I went to school and got a physical education degree and did that and did coaching as well. Now, but I still struggled with a lot of things, just keeping people at a distance. And until I owned a gymnastic business. And this was before I was a Christian, but I was seeking God. And God brought 2 people into my life. They brought their kids to the gym. Their names were Bill and Sandy Senecal. And I could tell there was something different about them. Because, I had gotten so turned off to church when I was in 7th and 8th grade that because I saw people just pretending to be religious and trying to impress people or somehow to think they can make up for all the bad they did during the week. But during the rest of the week, their hearts were far from God. So in 8th grade, I became an atheist. I didn't want to have anything to do with God. But here I'm in my late 20s, and I meet a couple, and I'm seeking God at this point. I'm not looking into Christianity because I thought it was a joke, but I was still searching into the New Age, Eastern religions, and all these things. But God gave me a dream and he warned me that these things lead to Satan's influence in my life. So I was mad. I said, okay, Lord, why can't you just give me an answer here? God, why can't you just show me what the truth is? And after I said that, a few months later, or maybe even weeks, Bill and Sandy started bringing their kids to my gymnastic business. And I knew there was something different about them. I could just sense it. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but now I do. You know, they had the Holy Spirit in them, and that's what I was sensing. Well, anyway, Bill and Sandy just reached out to me in love. I never felt like a project with them. I felt like, here's some people that are really kind. You know, they invited me to the house for dinner, but I resisted a few times because, man, I'm not used to that. I kind of freaked out. But they were persistent, and eventually I gave in. And over time, we developed a good relationship. And it's through them that I became open to Jesus. And Bill was taking me through the Bible, and it was through the Bible, especially the prophecies, where I saw there is indeed a God, and the Bible is the Word of God. And so God used these two people through love to point me to him. First, they loved me unconditionally and just put up with all my garbage in my life. But eventually they pointed me to Jesus. And so that was a very important point in my life. Okay. Now, later on in Bible school, while I was doing Bible school, you know, this is, okay, sorry, I'm going to go back in time a little bit. Oh, no, sorry, I'm confusing myself this morning. Hopefully, I'm not confusing you too much. But later on, when I went to Bible school, 2 years later, after being in school a while, I was living with this family for a while, and the father, the husband, reminded me of my dad. Oh my gosh. That just brought up a lot of garbage in my heart. Just things were coming up, lots of pain. I was hurt. And I was meeting with a couple of pastors for a while where we'd go look at Bible verses and I'd share what I'm feeling and they'd pray for me. And then one night, I had this dream. And in the dream, I see my father playing with my sisters. I have 3 sisters. And this is like looking back in time when my sisters were really young. And he's wrestling with them and they're laughing. And none of that happened, not in reality. Okay? But here I'm seeing it in this dream. And my reaction wasn't one of bitterness. It wasn't angry. Why wasn't it like this? Why couldn't we have been loved? No. My reaction was, gee, I wonder if it's possible for us to have any type of a relationship like this now with our Father. And when I woke up, all the anger, the bitterness, everything, my hatred of my dad, it was gone. From that day on, my heart was broken for my father. And, you know, I sent him letters and told him what God had done in my life and how I forgive him. But he never responded, ever. But I just continued going on in my life. And eventually, came to this hard part of my life when my mom was dying of cancer. And before she died, she told me about how when I was a young boy, little boy, a baby, and she would spend all of her time loving me, that he got jealous. And he used to tell her how stupid she was for loving me so much. And I thought that was strange when my mom told me this. But then later, in talking to his brothers and sisters, I found out what happened in his life. I found out his story of why he was this way. When he came from a family, of a big family. I don't know, can't remember for sure, like 13 kids or so, 13, 14, something like that, kids in the family. And during the Depression, their father left them and just abandoned the family. And my father was in 8th grade, and he was put into foster care. And he became very bitter about this experience, about being abandoned. And that bitterness stayed with him his whole life. He always felt this insecurity because of what happened. And then, then he meets my mom, and I finally have someone to love me. And then all of a sudden, after a year, I was born. And now my mother's love is going to me. Maybe too much, I don't know, than to him. And he's back to that insecure state of being hurt. So when I understood all this stuff, it just made me feel sorry for my dad. and what he experienced in life. You know, it's very easy to see why he was the way he was. And again, my heart was broken for him. But this was all a miracle. This is not something I in any way worked out in my own life to forgive. God just took it away. Praise be to him. So, is there any hope? Yes, there is. And that hope is love. Only love can heal the human heart. Nothing else can do it. There is no other solution. Only love can heal the human heart. So what can we learn from the Bible about what love is in regards to some of the things I've talked about? Well, first of all, let's start with Romans 5:8. And here we see what real love looks like. Romans 5:8. But God proves his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. True love is sacrificial. True love seeks the best of the other at cost to oneself. And so if we want to bring love to others, it's going to cost us. It may hurt at times, but it's the only thing that will heal people's hearts. John 15, verses 12 and 13. This is my command. Love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends. So again, we see this idea of it costs you. It's a sacrifice. As you love others, they won't love back. They probably won't love back, especially if they don't know how. They may hurt you, but still, Jesus, even though many hurt him, he still pursued love. Right? So I like this quote from Wintry Night. It says this: don't treat the needs and sufferings of others as something to avoid. Treat it as your opportunity to be more like Jesus. Now, honestly, for me, this is not easy. It's hard for me to feel like loving people. For me, the only secret I've really learned is at that moment when I need to love someone is to remind myself of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross for me, one who was worthless, one who did not deserve his love. And those are the things, that is the thing that can help me to make the decision to love others in the moment. But it's usually not for me, it's not a feeling. You know, I love it when it is, that makes it easy. But even if the feelings aren't there, the love should be. Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourself. Everyone should look out not only for his own interest, but also the interest of others. So love means we're seeking the interest of others. We're not focused only on ourselves. And you know who was a great example of this for me? And I have to qualify, he didn't pay me to say this, okay? Shane, your pastor, when he lived in here in Romania, and he was a pastor of the church where I served under him, I've never experienced love from a human being like I did from him. That man knows how to love. And if you go to his church, I think you know what I'm talking about. And so I was always amazed at how giving he was, and I could see the pain he experienced from people at times, but yet he was always giving of himself. And I always wondered why he was like this. Then one time, when I was back in the States, I visited his parents. Shane wasn't there. He was in Romania. And I went and visited his parents, Bruce and Terry. Oh my gosh. Those two just loved me like I had never been loved. And Bruce, you know what he did? We were in the car driving, and we were talking about this gourmet kind of premium soda pop that I used to love when I lived in America. And he knew it too, and he liked it. And so we were talking like this. Then a couple of days later, he comes up to me, hey, William, I have something for you. And he opens up, and there's all this gourmet soda pop. And I'm like, wow. And I look at him and I see that he's not doing this to make me feel good about him or to be impressed by him. I could see he was just looking to see the delight I was receiving from what he did. It was not selfish. He was giving of himself. And Terry, she was the same way. I just was so loved when I was with them. When I went back to Romania, I saw Shane. I went, okay, buddy, I know why you're the way you are. Man, your parents are amazing. And so it's great to see what love can do and how it impacts people and how they live. Now, like I said, I wish everybody had those experiences like Shane did. But not everybody does. A lot of people have experienced a lot of pain in their lives because of sin. So let's not be selfish. I like what Klein Snodgrass said. I like that last name, Snodgrass. He said this, do unto others as God has done to you. I think this is a good mantra or motto to remember. Do unto others as God has done unto you. He loved you when you didn't deserve it. He sacrificed for you. He paid the price. And he's there for you always. So how can we love? I'm not going to be able to explain everything, but here's a few ideas I have about how we can love people who are hurting, abandoned, or abused. Okay? And that is, we see from Leviticus chapter 23, verse 22. When you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap all the way to the edge of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest, the leftover stuff. Leave them for the poor and the resident alien. I am the Lord your God. So what God was saying is he wanted them to leave the margins of the fields of the crops for the poor so they could have access to it. And I think about those today who are poor in spirit. And here's how I interpret those verses for today. If you have a farm, yeah, you can still do that in some way. But I think of it in terms of the time, our time, how we spend our time every day. Do we make time for people who are not easy to deal with? Are we so busy that we can't even see people who are hurting? So we need to make margin in our lives to help people and to know that they're hurting as well. I find this a challenge. It's so easy in our technological age and everything we have to be busy all the time. But if Jesus is your Lord, you need to make margin in your life, in your time for people. And to be praying and asking God how you can reach out and love people. And have God bring people across your path who are hurting. And that you can bring his love to them. Now we have to be wise about how we do this. As Jesus said, we have to be innocent as doves, but as wise as snakes. Right? We need to be street smart. Because people, there's certain people out there that could really want to hurt you. But like for me, mainly when I try to reach out to them, I meet them somewhere for lunch. So it's in a public place. And I don't think it's wise for someone who's really hurting, for a woman to reach out to them. I think you should get some man to come with you, or to have a man go and help them. So just be careful about how you do that. All right, let's go on to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort. He comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any kind of affliction through the comfort we ourselves receive from God. So what we should do is the pains we receive in life, the hurt that we get, we can turn around and use that pain and hurt to love others with. Like if you were sexually abused, you can reach out and minister love to those who've been sexually abused. And like I did, I became a coach so I can encourage and love kids in that way where I could say a good word and words of encouragement so they could feel special. So we can take our pains and we can use it for good. And later I'll share a quote at the end that's very powerful for me. Okay. Now, how do we deal with people's issues when they do strange things or they're not appreciative of what we do? Like Jeff, when we give him money and he spent the money on a jacket. Well, let's look at Luke 22, verses 32 to 34. 2 others, criminals, were also led away to be executed with him. When they arrived at the place called the Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on the right and one on the left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing." And they divided his clothes and cast lots. We see the secret there. Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing. When we reach out to love people and they hurt us, this is what we can say. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. We have to understand they don't know how to love. So we may receive a lot of pain. It may take a long time. But if you persist and you don't give up, maybe eventually you will see change in their lives. Okay. Let's go on to Luke 9, verses 23 to 25. Then he said to them all, "If anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life because of me will save it. For what does it benefit someone if he gains the whole world, yet loses or forfeits his soul?" Okay. So we need to learn to deny ourselves as believers. We can't live for ourselves anymore. We're living for Jesus. And so we need to be able to willing to reach through when we see strange people or people who aren't beneficial for us. We need to be able to sacrifice and be willing to offer for them what Christ offered for us. Okay. We need to learn to lose our life. We don't live for ourselves. We need to say no to us and to say yes to those in need. Now, Martin Luther talked about it this way. That sin, he talked about, sin is when we turn inwardly and we live our life focused on ourselves only. We have turned away from God and from others and are now focused on ourselves. But the secret when we come to Christ is to first look up to God and then look out to those in need. This is the secret we need to take. Turn from inward to upward, then outward. Numbers 14, verse 18. And this really kind of explains the experience I had, how my grandfather's abandonment affected my father, and then how he affected me. Numbers 14, 18. The Lord is slow to anger and abounding in faithful love, forgiving iniquity and rebellion, but he will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation. So people who have been hurt tend to hurt their children, and they grow up and hurt their children. So there's this, we want to stop that. We want to bring a stop to that. And so we need to come in and break that and bring love into their lives. So like what people did for me, so that chain stopped and it will no longer go on. And then in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. So we need to want to be changed. We want true worship in our lives. We want our minds to be changed in how we think. We need our minds renewed from always being about us to being about God and about others and what God would want us to do for them. And then this is a saying that I try to live by. not very successfully sometimes, but this verse really speaks to me, and I'm sure most of you know it. Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live now in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Right? So you realize that God loved you. He gave himself for you. So now you live for him. Because you live in faith, you live for him instead of yourself. We need to be motivated to love others by Jesus' love for us. This is the only thing that will work. At least that's all I've found. And I want to end the sermon by sharing a long quote. I'll break it into two parts by Henry Nouwen. Okay, I really think this is something that speaks well to this situation that we're in. For most of us, we've been hurt in some way, and his words can speak life to people, to encourage you. So here's the first part. Nobody escapes being wounded. We all are wounded people, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. The main question is not, how can we hide our wounds so we don't have to be embarrassed, but how can we put our woundedness in the service of others? When our wounds cease to be a source of shame and become a source of healing, we have become wounded healers. Okay. So think about that. That's why God doesn't take all our pain away. He doesn't make life easy for us. You know, when I became a Christian, I didn't become lovey-dovey, all this stuff, because God uses us in our pain. We can relate to people, and he wants to use us in the midst of that. Okay. And so I like that term, wounded healers. Okay. Now here's the second part. Jesus is God's wounded healer. Through his wounds, we are healed. Jesus' suffering and death brought joy and life. His humiliation brought glory. His rejection brought a community of love. As followers of Jesus, we can also allow our wounds to bring healing to others. So I want to encourage you. We can change the world one heart at a time. You don't have to try to change everybody. When I worked at the orphanage, I couldn't think about changing all the children and all the orphanages in Romania, but I could focus on those in the orphanage I was at. Okay. So as I close, here's 7 things I encourage you to how to love. Okay. Be motivated by Jesus' love for you. Okay. Use your pain to love others, but first turn upward, then outward. Leave margin in your life for those in pain. Get to know their story. And take baby steps. Don't try to hug them or push them into being normal when they're not ready for that. Be patient with them. Okay? Love them sacrificially. And lastly, do unto others as Jesus has done to you. So if you do these things, not only will you help change their lives for the better, you will also change yourself for the better as well. Because when we love in our pain, it does something for us as well. So brothers and sisters, I want to encourage you to reach out in love and just let the power of love do its work that God intended it to do. So thank you for listening to me today. It was a blessing to be here. And I wish you a great Memorial Day tomorrow, those in the States. And may this next week be full of blessings for you. Thank you.